Hey guys, how's it going? So today I'm going to make a video about the most disturbing horror films I've ever watched. So I'm gonna rank my 5 films that I've watched that disturb me the most. This is gonna be interesting. Let's begin. So at number 5, I'm going to start to talk about a classic horror film. And that film is Tourist Trap. A film from '79 that is probably the most unusual and confusing film from this list. This film mixes both the genres of slasher and supernatural, something that was done very little in horror cinema. And it made this film stand out in the sea of slashers that were released at that time. But even with such an original structure, the idea and plot of the film is very similar to the very famous classic film called House of Wax. Both films rely on a group of strangers who visit a museum of, in this case, mannequins, but in case of House of Wax, wax figures. And it turns out that these art displays are not what they seem, since the art displays are actually real people who were made that way by something in the museum in both films. What makes this film so disturbing is how everything was filmed and shown on screen, such as the number of times the mannequins come to life and frighten the visitors of this museum. And not only that, but the worst part is definitely the sounds the mannequins make. Now this is probably the part that truly stayed with me, because they make the most hellish and out of this world noises that I will never be able to forget. Never. Also, the supernatural twist that this film has makes the mannequins even more terrifying, as they're all being controlled at the same time by the artist who made them. And the worst part of this film, and when I say worst I mean more disturbing, is when this artist is making these mannequins, and the footage on the film that shows him putting real people into mannequins is something I will truly never forget, for its gruesome and just completely disturbing process. And at number 4, we have The Sacrament, which is a found footage horror film that displays one of the most disturbing real-life events in the US. And by that I mean it's about the biggest mass suicide ever committed in the world. Jim Jones was a real person who was believed to be a faith healer and a heavenly preacher who literally took advantage of his big charisma and persuasion to orchestrate a mass suicide of himself and his followers in Jonestown. So in order to make this mass suicide happen, Jim Jones mixed Kool-Aid with cyanide, and he created this poisonous drink. And he made his followers believe that they had to drink this poisonous drink so they could ascend to heaven, and that's what God wanted and intended to. So stupid, but desperate people believe in anything. So he indirectly killed 909 people. This film is inspired by that exact incident, and is basically about a group of documentary guys who go visit one of the crew members' sister on her new life in this cult. And so they begin to explore and interview the surroundings of this place and its people, trying to understand their motives to what made them want to join this cult and their day-to-day life in this false sacred and truly profane way of life. What stands out in this film is the part of the mass suicide, as Jim Jones, the leader, is trying to convince everyone to drink this poisonous drink so they can ascend to heaven, and the crew members try to make the people think otherwise, but they just get chased by the armed guards of the sanctuary. So the mass suicide continues and the horror never ends. And at number 3, we have probably the saddest film that I've ever seen. And that film is Lake Mungo. Truly a film that feels and looks so real that we're forgetting that we're watching a movie and we think that we're watching an actual documentary. This film is about another documentary crew, but this time they're making a documentary on a supernatural occurrence that happened, or even better, that is happening to this family whose daughter disappeared and showed up dead without any reason. So they think that she's out to torment them at their own house. As the crew uncovers more and more information about the death of their daughter, so they understand if it really was a suicide or homicide, some of the explanations for how devastating her life truly was of this innocent girl start to emerge. And the crew begins to think that it was merely a suicide and there's no hauntings happening, but only the hallucinations of this family that try to deal with the grief of their deceased daughter. Only at the end is when both the crew and the family discover what happened to this girl, with footage that was found on this girl's phone before she died. And what is shown on this footage is something that disturbed me and made me feel so miserable that I will never be able to forget that experience. So at number 2, we have a very big film, Eden Lake. And this film basically portrays a couple who's having a quiet and fun time in the woods near a lake who they always used to go. But this time there were a group of teens who were being obnoxious with their loud music and obscene language that were disrupting the good time that this couple was having, in which the guy is going to propose to his girlfriend, so in order to make that happen, he tries to make the teens leave the premise, which results in the teens trying to kill him and his girlfriend. The disturbing essence of this film is when the couple, in order to survive, starts to kill each one of these teens, who are truly just kids, but they need to do it in order to continue to breathe. The slow and painful deaths makes you really think life as a whole to what us humans are really capable to do in order to survive and to avenge our loved ones. The end, as all of the films I've talked about today, really broke me. It's probably the most devastating and brutal ending a film can have, and it shows how psychopathic humans are in their nature. It looks impossible to have a film more disturbing than all of the films I've talked about today. But guess what? There is one more, and that film is the Pugabsp Tapes. A found footage horror film that is basically about footage who was found of a real serial killer on the Pugabsp area in New York. This film feels like a link you found on a Murder for Pleasure page on the deep web, and you watched it because you were so curious on what it was, and now you cannot forget, even better, you can never forget what you saw. You try to see how much us humans could cross the line on making a film and just disturb people to their core by showing horrendous, dreadful, and unspeakable scenes of the serial killer kidnapping, raping, and torturing these innocent victims, and even making them gain Stockholm Syndrome, since they know no better now and this is their new reality. Even with this awful stuff, the film still is an amazing depiction on the macabre and morbid natures of the humankind, and what nightmarish acts they can commit for the pleasure of it. But be warned, this film is not for all.